Section 18 of the American Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary in Arkansas. The American Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. The Adventures of the Infallible Godahl by Frederick Irving Anderson. Part 1. Anderson Oliver Ormiston was never much of a sportsman with a rod or gun, though he could do fancy work with a pistol in a shooting gallery. He had, however, one game from which he derived the utmost satisfaction. Whenever he went traveling, which was often, he invariably caught his trains by the tip of the tail, so to speak, and hung on till he could climb aboard. In other words, he believed in close connections. He had a theory that more valuable dollars and cents time and good animal heat are wasted warming seats in stations waiting for trains than by missing them. The sum of joy to his methodical mind was to halt the slamming gates at the last fraction of the second with majestic upraised hand, and to stroll aboard his parlor car with studied deliberation, while the train crew were gnashing their teeth in rage and swearing to get even with the gateman for letting him through. Yet Mr. Ormiston never missed a train. A good many of them tried to miss him, but none ever succeeded. He reckoned time and distance so nicely that it really seemed as if his trains had nothing else so important as waiting until Mr. Oliver Ormiston got aboard. On this particular June day he was due in New Haven at 2. If he failed to get there at 2 o'clock, he could very easily arrive at 3. But an hour is 60 minutes, and a minute is 60 seconds. And further, Mr. Ormiston, having passed his word that he would be there at 2 o'clock, surely would be. On this particular day, by the time Ormiston finally got to the Grand Central, the train looked like an odds-on favorite. In the first place, he was still in his bed at an hour when another and less experienced traveler would have been watching the clock in the station waiting room. In the second place, after kissing his wife in that absent-minded manner characteristic of true love, he became tangled in a Broadway traffic rush at the first corner. Scarcely was he extricated from this when he ran into a socialist mass meeting at Union Square. It was due only to the wits of his chauffeur that the taxicab was extricated with very little damage to the surrounding human scenery. But our man of method did not fret. Instead, he buried himself in his book, a treatise on cause and effect, which at that moment was lulling him with this soothing sentiment: there is no such thing as accident. The so-called accidents of everyday life are due to the preordained action of correlated causes, which is inevitable and over which man has no control. This was comforting, but not much to the point, when Oliver Ormiston looked up and discovered he had reached 23rd Street and had come to a halt. A 60-foot truck, with an underslung burden consisting of a 60-ton steel girder, had at this point suddenly developed weakness on its off hind wheel and settled down on the pavement across the right-of-way like a tired elephant. This, of course, was not an accident. It was due to a weakness in the construction of that wheel, a weakness that had from the beginning been destined to block street cars and taxicabs at this particular spot at this particular hour. Mr. Ormiston dismounted and walked a block. Here he hailed a second taxicab, and soon was spinning north again at a fair speed, albeit the extensive building operations in Fourth Avenue had made the street well nigh impassable. The roughness of the pavement merely shook up his digestive apparatus and gave it zest for the fine luncheon he was promising himself the minute he stepped aboard his train. His new chauffeur got lost 3 times in the maze of traffic about the Grand Central Station. This, however, was only human, seeing that the railroad company changed the map on 42nd Street every 24 hours during the course of the building of its new terminal. Mr. Ormiston at length stepped from his taxicab, gave his grip to a porter, and paid the driver from a huge roll of bills. This same roll was no sooner transferred back to his pocket than a nimble-fingered pickpocket removed it. This, again, was not an accident. That pickpocket had been waiting there for the last hour for that roll of bills. It was preordained, inevitable, and Oliver Ormiston had just 30 seconds to catch his train by the tail and climb aboard. He smiled contentedly to himself. It was not until he called for his ticket that he discovered his loss. For a full precious second he gazed at the hand that came away empty from his money pocket, and then, " I find I left my purse at home," he said, with a grand air he knew how to assume on occasion. " My name is Mr. Oliver Ormiston." Now Oliver Ormiston was a name to conjure with. " I don t doubt it," said the ticket agent, dryly. " Mr. Andrew Carnegie was here yesterday begging car fare to 125th Street, and Mr. John D. Rockefeller quite frequently drops in and leaves his dollar watch in hock. Next !" And the ticket agent glared at the man blocking the impatient line, and told him to move on. Ormiston flushed crimson. He glanced at the clock. For once in his life he was about to experience that awful feeling of missing his train. For once in his life he was about to be robbed of that delicious sensation of hypnotizing the gate keeper and walking majestically down that train platform that extends northward under the train shed a considerable part of the distance toward Yonkers. 20 seconds! Ormiston turned round, still holding his ground, and glared concentrated malice at the man next in line. That man was in a hurry. In his hand he held a bundle of bills. For a second the thief instinct that is latent in us all suggested itself to Ormiston. There, within reach of his hand, was the money, the precious paltry dollar bills that stood between him and his train. It scared him to discover that he, an upright and honored citizen, was almost in the act of grabbing them like a common pickpocket. Then a truly remarkable thing happened. The man thrust his handful of bills at Ormiston. " The only way I can raise this blockade is to bribe you," he said, returning Ormiston s glare. " Here, take what you want, and give the rest of us a chance." With the alacrity of a blind beggar miraculously cured by the sight of much money, Ormiston grabbed the handful, extracted what he needed for his ticket, and thrust the back into the waiting hand of his unknown benefactor. He caught the gate by a hair. So did his unknown friend. Together they walked down the platform, each matching the other s leisurely pace with his own. They might have been two potentates, so deliberately did they catch this train. Ormiston would have liked very much to thank this person, but the other presented so forbidding an exterior that it was hard to find a point of attack. By force of habit Ormiston boarded the parlor car, quite forgetting he did not have money for a seat. So did the other. The unknown thrust a bill at the porter. " Get me 2 chairs," he said. " One is for this gentleman." Once inside and settled, Ormiston renewed his efforts to thank this strange person. That person took a card from his pocket and handed it to Ormiston. " Don't run away with the foolish idea," he said, tartly, " that I have done you a service willingly. You were making me miss my train, and I took this means of bribing you to get you out of my way. That is all, sir. At your leisure you may send me your check for the trifle." " A most extraordinary person," said Ormiston to himself. " Let me give you my card," he said to the other. " As to the service rendered, you are welcome to your own ideas on that. For my part I am very grateful." The unknown took the proffered card and thrust it in his waistcoat pocket without glancing at it. He swung his chair round and opened a magazine, displaying a pair of broad, unneighborly shoulders. This was rather disconcerting to Ormiston, who was accustomed to have his card act as an open sesame. " Damn his impudence," he said to himself. " He takes me for a mendicant. I 11 make copy of him." This was a popular author's way of getting even with those who offended his tender sensibilities. Two things worried Ormiston. One was his luncheon, or rather the absence of it, and the other was his neighbor. This neighbor, now that Ormiston had a chance to study him, was a young man, well set up. He had a fine bronzed face that was not half so surly as his manner. He was now buried up to his ears in a magazine, oblivious of everything about him, even the dining car porter, who strode down the aisle and announced the first call to lunch in the dining car. " I wonder what the fellow is reading," said Ormiston to himself. He peeped over the man's shoulder, and was interested at once, for the stranger was reading a copy of a magazine called by the vulgar The Whited Sepulchre. It was the pride of this magazine that no one on earth could read it without the aid of a dictionary. Yet this man seemed to be enthralled. And what was more to the point, and vastly pleasing to Ormiston, The man was at that moment engrossed in one of Ormiston's own effusions.